Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be demoing how to paint this moody, misty landscape taking place in the winter season. Without further ado, let's get painting. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be using Payne's Gray, Black, and Perylene Green by Winsor & Newton. The paper I've taped down here is a size 5 by 7 inches. The brushes I'll be using are by the brand Princeton, and I'm using a size 4 and a size 16 round brush. And I also have some salt on hand that I'm going to be using for our snowflake effect for our winter landscape. I'll also be using a little bit of white gouache to add some more detailed snowflakes. We'll be using a lot of wet and wet technique for this landscape, so the first thing I want to do is take my large brush and just do a nice wash of water all over the page. A sponge brush will also work perfectly well with this step as well. Okay, I've got this page nice and saturated. Next, I want to take just the smallest hint of some black, and I want to incorporate just a few touches of black as kind of a moody effect to get a foggy sky. And I'm being sure to leave some areas white, but I just want a nice subtle kind of mist happening in here. I'm also going to do just a faint touch of Payne's Gray, just to give it a little bit of a cooler undertone to the mist. And obviously black is very potent in color, and so is Payne's Gray. So definitely be sure to start small, and then you can always add more. Okay, now I want to grab a touch of black again, and I'm actually going to mix up a touch of black with a little bit of Payne's Gray. And while the page is still wet, I want to start to kind of build our mountain, and I'm going to start by doing kind of an angled dash line for part of our ridge here. And then I'm going to just make my way using the belly of my brush and kind of just do this subtle, almost fan-like shape. I'm going to swoop it all the way over to the left. And then I'm going to just take my damp brush and just kind of buff out this transition here where the mountain is going to meet the mist below. All right, and now I want to switch gears to my size 4 brush for some little bit of finer details, and we'll continue to add some more details to our mountain as it dries. But I'm just going to go ahead and add more of a shape to our mountain, kind of doing this peak. So doing kind of two angled lines that are going to eventually form a more jagged, defined peak here. And then from here, I want to just gently lift some of the pigment off using the belly of my brush and plenty of pressure. I kind of want to get some highlights in here that are more subtle. Then from here, I want to do just a few kind of jagged brush strokes here, just to give the illusion of some more variegation in the rock face of the mountain. And then over to the left, I want to do just the hint of an additional peak off in the distance. Just kind of keeping it loose, adding some shading. And again, because our page is wet, it's not super well defined just yet, but this is just like a good base coat to get our loose mountain formation going. I'm now going to layer a little bit more of those colors here. And I've got kind of a slight little hill leading up to the peak of our mountain. Just gonna give our mountain a little bit of irregular texture towards the peaks. That way it doesn't look like a perfect triangle. Okay, so while that is kind of setting a little bit, I want to get started on some Misty pines. And for those, I'm actually going to be mixing some Perylene Green with a touch of black, just to make it even deeper. And I slowly want to incorporate a few pine trees here. And before I do, I can already tell that my page has dried on me, surprisingly. Not so much up here, but down here. So, whoops on that. Definitely assumed it was still damp. So I'm just gonna apply some water here and just wash out that pine tree, which is no big deal. But I still kind of want some misty effect in here. I'm gonna add just a touch of water in this transition line. Okay, so from here, I'm gonna start by doing actually some jagged motions with our black and Perylene Green blend. I just wanna do a few just kind of irregular up and down brushwork to kind of mimic some misty trees, just to get the overall density of the forest covered. Okay. And before I go any further with my painting, after I've got kind of this irregular brushwork, I want to take a pinch of salt, and a little goes a long way, but I'm just going to take some sea salt to add some snow to our mountains. I just did a few little bits of sea salt and some down below. And again, a little really does go a long way. So just start with like a few granules and you can build from there as we continue painting if need be. But I've definitely gone crazy with the salt before and ended up with kind of a crazy blizzard snowstorm situation instead of like a subtle snowfall. All right, now I want to start to kind of build our pine trees. And I'm starting off towards the right here, and I'm just starting with a vertical line and then just kind of organically placing some irregular texture on either side using really light pressure with the tip of my size 4 brush, kind of following a cone-shaped silhouette. And the top is going to be slightly more defined and maybe not in too much mist. Okay. And I'm just going to continue on with my Perylene Green and Payne's Gray. and incorporate some pine trees. Maybe this one here is slightly shorter, and maybe just a little bit loosely defined. So this is where you can get creative with the wet and wet technique. And I just got the tip here defined, but the rest is slightly fogging out, which is totally fine. Just gonna add a little bit more texture to this tree. Okay. And then as we get towards the center here, I just want the kind of essence of a tree. I don't want to go too crazy with the definition because I want some variegation of trees that are more misty and some that are more defined. So I'm just going to do a couple that are more fogged out here. Okay. Then as I get more towards the left, I'm going to start to kind of build the definition here. So I'm going to do a slightly larger pine tree. Playing with that texture towards the top of the tree. Then off towards the left, I want to do probably one of our tallest trees in the mix, just like that. And as we go, you may need to mix up more of your color. So here we got a slightly dense tree towards the bottom. It's going to have a lot more finer detail using really fine pressure with the tip of the size 4 brush. I just want to get some irregularity. That word is such a tongue twister for me. And have some air kind of coming between the branches a little bit. So this tree is a little bit more less defined. It's got less foliage on it. Some more organic looseness to it rather than a dense full tree. I kind of want to show some variegation in our trees here. Just adding some more pigment down below where it kind of gets watered down a little bit. Then off towards the left, I'll do a slightly shorter tree. And with this one, I'll kind of mimic the same concept where it's just slightly less full. It's just got some organic gaps in between. And before we move on to our mountain, while this area is still nice and saturated, I'm gonna add some sea salt and just allow that to bloom and do its thing. It's so tempting to add more when you can't see the full effect. So I was just about to add more, but I'm gonna try to refrain myself. Okay, so now we can move on and mix up a little bit more of our Payne's Gray and Black blend to add just a little bit more detail to our mountain here. So we've got our Black and Payne's Gray, in our size 4 brush. And I'm going to do a little bit of a dry brushing technique. So I'm just tapping my brush on my paper towel and using the pigment that's left, I'm just going to slowly just incorporate a little bit of dry brushing. And as we apply some, I'm going to rinse off my brush and using a clean brush this time, just loosely kind of buff out the transition between the dry brush texture and into the mountain. Then from here, I want to start to build some of our mountain texture. So I'm just taking this color and just adding a little bit more texture to the rock face of our mountain, keeping it really loose and simple. Then on the right here, I'm going to do a different angle. So almost doing kind of an angled upside down Y letter here. Then obviously that's very potent, so I'm just going to rinse my brush off and tap it on my paper towel and just start to kind of buff that out just a little bit. We still want some definition here, but we don't want it to be too drastic. So I'm just taking the side of my brush and just kind of tapping that out a little bit. And here towards the right, I want to incorporate some more shading. Again, just using the belly of my brush. And then as needed, I'm just adding a little bit more water to help glide the pigment across. I'm gonna add a touch more color to add some more depth in this area. And then I'm just kind of defining the edge of our peak here. So I'm just going to loosely incorporate some watered down Payne's Gray and Black. And then from here, I just want to smooth out this transition. Again, still wanting that loose, misty effect. So any harsh water lines, I just want to be mindful about. So just taking pressure with my brush and just using that to kind of smooth out these lines. And then again, I'm just going to build up some of the depth in our mountain here. Adding some more shading towards the right. Leaving some of that white as a focal point highlight of snow. Then I just want to loosely define that peak just a little bit. Okay, and then here I love that you can just see the essence of a mountain, but it's really fogged out. I'm just gonna leave that as is. I really like that it's looser. And again, I'm just taking my time to kind of smooth out any transition areas. And before it's all dry, I want to be sure to add just a little bit more salt in this wet area. I want to add a couple birds, and I'm just going to use some plain black and use really light pressure with the tip of my brush. And I want to paint a bird, I would say one over here. And this one's going to be kind of like a V shape, like a V letter. Using super light pressure. I've got one bird off in the distance. And then may want to have a little friend for the bird here. So I'm going to paint another one just down below. This one's going to be a little bit more flat. So both of their wings are kind of at different angles. Just going to smooth out this line just a little bit. Okay. And before we go any further, I'm just gonna allow our paper to fully dry. So I'm gonna give it about 10 to 15 minutes. And in that time, the sea salt will have taken its full effect, which will be super cool to see how that incorporates the snowfall in our landscape. And we'll also add a few more snowflakes using our white gouache as well. All right, now that my painting is just about dry, I am going to use my size 4 brush with really light pressure to add some white, more defined snowflakes. So I'm just going to be using some white gouache. You could use white acrylic, whatever you've got on hand. And here I just want to incorporate some variety of white snowflakes. So I'm just lightly tapping my brush here in front of some of the trees. I'm just adding these irregularly, so not evenly spaced out, but just kind of sporadic. All right, next I want to start to incorporate a few snowflakes just in front of the mountain viewpoint here. And I'm just doing really light pressure. Don't want to go too crazy here, but just enough to see that there's snowfall kind of scattered throughout. Thank you so much for joining me for today's watercolor tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any further watercolor tutorials.